thought this game would be more fun if the goals were further apart.
Artist and co-writer John Byrne and Chris Claremont created the villainous character of Avalanche, which first made its appearance on January 1981 in issue 141 of the Uncanny X-Men. The character has two versions, and both have been a foe with the X-Men. The Dominikos Petrakis version of the character is a Cretan mutant, and on the other hand, Avalanche, who is also known as Lance Alvars, has made an appearance in X-Men Evolution. The Petrakis version has the powers that generate strong seismic waves that are capable of creating earthquakes, whereas Lance is a mutant teen who is a little distracted and is in fact Shadowcat's love interest. In today's episode, we will be exploring everything about this hot-headed mutant. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Pity.
Exploring the origins of Avalanche. Avalanche, aka Dominikos, was born in Agios Nikolaos, a coastal city of Greece, and the island of Crete. His hatred towards the human race grew when he witnessed the murder of his own kind, and realized that mankind is brutal. This grungy and rebellious villain holds the power to disintegrate any inorganic matter and trigger earthquakes of various intensities, but he decides to hide them from showcasing out in the world. His grudges got stronger when the mutant race was hunted and brutally murdered at the hands of humans. His past remains a mystery, and all we know is he was invited by Mystique to join the second Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. When Senator Robert Kelly gave his statement in a testimony that mutants are a great threat to mankind's safety, Brotherhood wanted to assassinate him, but their attempt was soon interrupted by the X-Men, where the two engaged in combat. Avalanche did escape the battlefield, but he never let go of his criminal tendencies and terrorist acts. Soon after, he also engaged in a conflict with the Avengers. He left the Brotherhood and turned into a more brutal version of himself when he threatened to use his powers if he was not paid by the California state. He also tried using his powers against the Hulk, where he ended up being injured and breaking his limbs. He returns to the Brotherhood, where they meet Rum and Hybrid, and the gang engages in a fight against the X-Men as Brotherhood of the Evil Mutants. Lance, on the other hand, is a teen mutant who is a rebel loner as well as a member of the Brotherhood, and is best known for his foe, the X-Men leader Cyclops. The character started off pretty irrational, hot-headed, and temper-driven, but as the series in the comics went on, Avalanche's personality also matured. His moral ambiguousness has taken the lead on his mind, and he becomes more unwilling towards his villainous nature. He commits petty crimes and dwells in conflict whenever societal hatred shines upon his mutant kind. Despite joining the X-Men, he does not really get along with his teammates. Looking back at some of his memorable comic book story arcs, New Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. We all know Mystique and her mysterious ways to test and approach people. On one such occasion, she met Avalanche and convinced him to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which was about to have its second incarnation. He readily agreed to join because of the intense hatred that he had been harboring against mankind, and his traumatic past experiences that left him burning with rage against humanity. His first mission with the group was to assassinate Senator Robert Kelly, who was running an anti-mutant campaign, but it was foiled by the X-Men, and they had to battle them instead. Eventually, he lost, but Avalanche went on to play one of the biggest roles in the Brotherhood of Mutants, such as fighting alongside them in a battle against the Avengers, where Miss Marvel lost her powers to Rogue. He left the Brotherhood after a while, and tried his hand at blackmailing the entire state of California for money, or else he would induce massive earthquakes, but he unfortunately met Hulk on his way, and that fight left him with both of his arms broken, and wounded enough for him to abandon the fight. He went back to the Brotherhood to recuperate. Freedom Force. Avalanche entered the Freedom Force by turning the Brotherhood to the United States government and reassured them that they would work for the government in order to pay for their crimes. Their first mission as the Freedom Force was to make contact and capture Magneto, the leader of the original Brotherhood, but his attitude towards the humans and heroes remained the same nonetheless. Just because they are working for the government doesn't mean that they would stop being resentful. They had various clashes with other superhero teams such as the Avengers and New Mutants, from which they even kidnapped Rusty Collins and Skids and X-Factor, but they somehow stopped doing this and focused more on the good aspects, such as stopping a prison break in the vault on one occasion. Avalanche has always been a team player. No matter what his team is like, he has rarely ever abandoned his team to fight with other superhero groups solo. One of the instances in which his psyche is revealed is during their last mission together as the Freedom Force. In Kuwait, his team kills a bunch of soldiers, which made him question what the team intended to do. He wondered why they had to be killed when a few of them could have been captured captured and questioned. Meanwhile, Desert Sword is annihilating the Freedom Force and is not leaving anyone alive. Super Saber is killed, and Crimson Commando loses his arm during his fight with Desert Sword. Black Razor lacerates Avalanche's abdomen, but luckily he ran away before he could be injured further. When questioned why his attack did not kill Avalanche, Razor states that it might have been the armor that he is wearing, or it's the psyche of Avalanche that prevented him from dying because the villain thought of himself as irredeemable and consigned to hell already. This clearly shows that while being a team player, he doesn't always agree with what his teams are up to. While escaping from the situation in a helicopter with Pyro and Blob coming to the helipad, Avalanche and Crimson are injured even further. Still, they somehow manage to climb on the transport while telling Pyro that they shouldn't bother finding the other members because they are simply not worth it. Pyro's death. Avalanche had formed a strong bond with his mutant comrade Pyro during their time together in Freedom Force and the Brotherhood. St. John Allardyce, who worked under the alias of Pyro, was a young man from Sydney, Australia, who discovered that he had the mutant power to manipulate fire and flame, and eventually joined the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, where he attempts to assassinate Senator Robert Kelly and fights against the X-Men and Avengers. He also worked under various Magneto subordinates. When Avalanche was assigned to investigate Jonathan Chambers' private island by the government, he was shocked to find a settlement of victims of the legacy virus, and Toad had assembled a new version of the Brotherhood, which included Blob and Pyro. Pyro had been diagnosed with the virus, and Avalanche was determined to help him, so he attempted to get his hands on a powerful mutagenic compound called Isotope E from the High Evolutionary. Unfortunately, he was stopped by the Heroes for Hire and Quicksilver, and in the end, Pyro still passed away from the virus. Avalanche was heartbroken, but he still held on to the memories of the time he shared with his friend. Mystique made a last attempt to put an end to Senator Kelly's life by trying to reunite her Brotherhood of Mutants. However, it was Pyro who put an end to this plan instead of the X-Men. Faced with his own mortality, Pyro chose to save Senator Kelly, making him reconsider his views on mutants. This left Avalanche feeling perplexed regarding his future. X-Corp. Banshee, who was formerly a member of the X-Men in Generation X, found himself in a difficult position after the death of his beloved Moira McTaggart from the legacy virus, and one of his students, Cinch. Desperate to help the mutant community, he used his old team's remaining funds to assemble a new team of superpowered mutants, with the majority of them being reformed villains. After Pyro's death, his friend's sacrifice seemed to have had a positive effect on Avalanche, as he joined X-Corp, Banshee's task force that policed the activities of mutants around the world. The revelation of Pyro's manipulation was a heartbreaking moment for Avalanche, who had held out hope that his friend had been redeemed. He felt betrayed and was deeply hurt by the news. He had to reevaluate his own beliefs and question whether he had been too quick to trust Pyro. Despite this, Avalanche still had faith in the potential of mutants, and he continued his work with X-Corp, hoping to make a difference in the world. Avalanche's actions during the revolt were among the most destructive he had ever seen. He used his powers to cause a massive earthquake, destroying the Eiffel Tower and creating a chasm beneath Radius. When it appeared that Radius had been killed, Avalanche believed that he had killed his own teammate and felt an immense guilt for his actions. However, it was eventually revealed that Radius had survived and had been depowered on M-Day. Avalanche was relieved to find that his teammate had made it out alive and was no longer in danger. Exodus Brotherhood. Wolfsbane, who was powerless at the time, managed to take down Avalanche when he descended in the heart of New York City. The authorities soon apprehended him afterwards. After a stint in the Mojoverse, Avalanche re-emerged during the Brotherhood's assault in the Xavier Institute. He was able to affect organic matter by shocking Rogue into submission with his powers. He then joined forces with the rest of the Brotherhood in their attack on the X-Mansion. The X-Men encountered the Brotherhood, and Zorn took off his helmet, where they were sucked into a black hole created by Shen Zorn that trapped both Juggernaut and Nocturne. Because Avalanche and the others ended up in the Mojoverse too, they reluctantly sold Nocturne and Juggernaut to Mojo in exchange for a way home. The black hole brought them to Mojo World, where Mojo accepted them in exchange for their freedom. Thanks to their quick thinking, Juggernaut and Nocturne eventually managed to get away from Mojo. Eventually, they were able to return to Earth and once again join forces with Exodus and the Brotherhood. After M-Day. After M-Day, when the mutant population had been drastically reduced, Avalanche began to understand that fighting for mutant rights was futile. He left his old life of being an activist/terrorist behind and moved to San Francisco, where he opened a small bar. Despite his new peaceful lifestyle, Avalanche constantly lived in fear of the X-Men coming to punish him for his previous actions. To his surprise, when they eventually did come to see him, it was only to declare a truce and let him know that if he ever returned to a life of crime, they would be there to stop him. Utopia. The mutants of San Francisco were not content with Norman Osborn's attempt to impose curfews on them, so a small group decided to take a stand. Avalanche and Sunspot, along with Hellion, Adam X, Lorelli, and Meld, chose to defy the curfew by going out during the time it was imposed, hoping to get imprisoned and draw attention to the unjust punishment they were facing. They wanted everyone to know that it was essential that people understand the consequences of not standing up for their rights. If they do not make their voices heard, they could be subjected to mistreatment. Avalanche was determined to make a better life for himself and those like him. He was extremely concerned that his hard work to build a new life and leave his former one behind would be wasted. He knew that if he and his fellow mutants acted aggressively and without regard for the law, it would only further the opposition's belief that mutants are dangerous and should not be trusted. Thus, when the Dark X-Men arrived at the scene, Avalanche and the other rioters were arrested as a sign that they would not resort to violence and chaos to achieve their goals. Despite his fears that his hard work to build a new life would be wasted, Avalanche was determined to prove that mutants are capable of peaceful protest and civil discourse. Nation X and fear itself. Avalanche used to live a life of crime, but he had turned things around with his newly owned bar in San Francisco. One night, the X-Men, Archangel, Beast, and Wolverine visited him. Wolverine warned Avalanche that if he ever went back to his criminal activities, the X-Men would take action against him. To make sure Avalanche remembered this, Wolverine destroyed his apartment before leaving. This was a reminder that the X-Men were serious about their warning. If Avalanche returned to a life of crime, they would not hesitate to take action. The X-Men did their best to prevent the unstoppable Juggernaut, powered by the Asgardian Serpent God, from reaching San Francisco. They were determined to keep the behemoth away, and so Avalanche was asked to help, despite his lack of confidence in the idea, and created a crater in the roadblock in an attempt to stop him. However, the Juggernaut, bolstered by the Serpent God's power, was able to simply walk over the crater, and the X-Men's plan was foiled. With no other options, Avalanche left the scene because he knew that there was nothing he could do. Uncanny Avengers and successor. Avalanche was a normal person living a typical life until he was manipulated by the Red Skull, a villainous mastermind. The Red Skull commanded Avalanche to cause chaos in New York City by targeting mutants who had recently returned. The Avengers and X-Men joined forces in order to take Avalanche down, but the Red Skull ultimately forced him to take his own life by throwing himself off a cliff. Avalanche tragically died, leaving a devastating path of destruction in his wake. The original Avalanche had committed a number of criminal acts prior to his death and had been attempting to make amends for his wrongdoing. However, his reputation was further damaged when a new mutant with the same abilities and name revealed himself and joined a team of malevolent mutants. This Avalanche's actions caused people to question whether the original Avalanche was truly sincere in his efforts to redeem himself. This may have been a contributing factor to the original Avalanche's untimely death, as his reputation was tarnished and was unable to put the past behind him.
How about trying that with me?
The Dominikos Petrakis version can be seen in X-Men the Animated Series. The Greco-Roman version of this villainous troublemaker can be seen in the X-Men the Animated Series, which was released in the 90s. A few notable episodes where Avalanche plays a role are The Cure. Dr. Gottfried Adler is a scientist who had gone to Scotland to do some research related to mutants. Cable approaches Angel and his girlfriend, who are sitting in a cabin, and threatens to kill her if Angel doesn't tell him where Adler is. Panicked for his girlfriend, he tells Cable that Adler is on Muir Island. Meanwhile, Professor X is on Muir Island and asks Moira McTaggart to look through Adler's work, but she says she can't. When he contacts Adler himself and asks him to meet, the scientist denies it. Through his powers, Xavier deduces that Adler might be a mutant and that he's trying to find a way to cure other mutants. When Rogue heard this, she was immensely interested in the idea that she might finally be able to touch people and sets off to find Adler. Gambit tries to follow her until she boards a passenger plane and stows away in it. Avalanche and Pyro are waiting for Mystique in a bar when Rogue walks in, and they mistake her for the shape-shifting mutant until she attacks them and throws Avalanche through a wall and into the cliffs below. When she finally meets Adler, she asks if she can be given the cure. The scientist says that he will think about it and reveals himself to be Mystique when she leaves. Mystique is currently working for Apocalypse, who wants Rogue to be taken as a slave. While Pyro is searching for Avalanche on the cliffs, he comes across Cable and has an altercation with him, getting shot in the end. He finally finds his friend and suggests that they should kidnap Adler, looking at how everyone is searching for him suddenly. Rogue goes back to Adler and they decide to test the cure on her. Before they could start, Avalanche and Pyro break in and kidnap Adler. Mystique reveals herself to be Adler to her teammates teammates while getting kidnapped. Cyclops and Jean Grey arrive at Muir Island because they thought Rogue might be there. Rogue defeats Avalanche and Pyro while Cable is hanging off of a cliff, fighting for dear life and threatening to kill Adler if he doesn't save him because he was the one who made the nullifying collars in Slave Island. Mystique then transforms to her original form and says the real Adler had been killed a long time ago and she was just posing all this time. Cyclops, Jean, and Xavier arrive at the cliff, and while Cable manages to hold on, Jean falls off the cliff, although Rogue saves her in the nick of time. Slave Island. This was the 7th episode of the series, predating the events in The Cure. Gambit, Storm, and Jubilee are captured on Genosha and are forced to work as slaves. They are made to wear nullifying collars that deactivate their powers and render them powerless. Even if Storm tries to make a run for it, her collar activates again and she falls to the ground. She was about to be killed, but Gambit convinces Bolivar Trask not to because she might be useful once the dam is built. She is put in an isolation cell, which triggers her claustrophobia. Meanwhile, there is a fire in the forest nearby, causing the Sentinels to send all the mutants back to their cells. Jubilee tries to rally everyone into an escape attempt, but no one is willing, so she goes back into her cell after the lights come on. When Wolverine comes back after his trip to Canada, he is worried that he cannot contact the people who went to Genosha, and the other X-Men set off to the island along with him, while Professor X stays back and contacts Moira McTaggart after they leave. On Genosha, Jubilee is taken to the isolation cell that has Storm in it, because Gambit leaked her escape plan to the guards. Gambit soon learns the reason the dam was being built. A Sentinel named Master Mold, which produced other Sentinels, was consuming most of Genosha's power grid, and this dam was expected to fulfill its energy requirements. When Gambit is caught, he offers to lead Gyrich to his teammates. On the way to his cell, he meets a heavily armed man who hands him a key to the power-dampening collars while fending off the guards. Gambit destroys the Sentinel near Jubilee and Storm, and they break the dam down, freeing all the mutants in the process. Cable destroys the factory while Master Mold creates a Sentinel that can counter Cable, and they both engage in a fight. The fight soon ends, and he goes off in search of his former colonel. Storm brings in a thunderstorm to destroy the dam, weakening herself to the point of fainting from exhaustion, but Rogue and others arrive on time and save her from falling. The factory is destroyed by an incoming wave, taking leader, Hodge, and Master Mold with it. The X-Men then reach their mansion, only to find it destroyed. A Rogue's Tale. This was an interesting episode where Rogue's powers were explored a little bit. Rogue experiences a delirious illusion of a blonde woman when she was fighting with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Her head starts to hurt really bad, and she is put in the infirmary of the mansion. She gets into altercations with Gambit first, and then Wolverine, both times thinking that the blonde woman was taunting her. Jean Grey finds a few photos of that woman and shows them to Rogue, who leads her out of the mansion, immediately to find her. She is hallucinating and hears that woman's voice when Cyclops was talking to her and crashes into the roof and flies away. Rogue had a vision of the blonde woman in a hospital when Storm found her near the Statue of Liberty that same day. This woman was a nameless patient who had been in a coma for a long time. When Cyclops, Wolverine, and Gambit reach the hospital, they are attacked by the Brotherhood led by Mystique and Blob. Mystique leads her to the woman in a coma and gets Rogue to touch her so that she can transfer the memories of the woman into her. All of her past experiences rush back to her, and she realizes that the woman lying on the bed in a coma was Miss Marvel, and she had absorbed Marvel's powers completely during a fight along back. Rogue is disgusted by what Mystique made her do, and tries to find a way to set these events straight. In the meantime, Marvel was fighting with Rogue's consciousness, and this was causing an identity crisis within her. To help her, Jean uses Cerebro to enter Rogue's mind and fight Marvel while Rogue gains control over her mind, telling Mystique that she is an X-Man now, and will not play her mind games anymore. The next day, Rogue visits the woman and states that her name is Carol Danvers, and touches her forehead so that her consciousness flows back. The woman opens her eyes and smiles, looking at Rogue leaving the room.
Looking for romance!
What was Avalanche Mutant like? Avalanche's personality is quite short-tempered, with a hint of groundless rage and impulsiveness. He is often in conflict with his moral values, along with irrational decision-making tendencies. His hatred towards humankind favors his mutant race. He stands taller than anyone of his age and is muscular in appearance, with messy dark brown hair and brown eyes. His physique is solid as well as intimidating. He has a tan olive color complexion with Mediterranean body features. His nose can stand peculiar due due to its larger size, but it somehow fits his face just well. Lance's Avalanche version is often seen wearing a brown vest made out of leather, which he tends to pair with a black shirt and torn jeans. If you are not up to date with the fashion statements, these are the jeans that have tears for fashion's sake, and are apparently our villain's signature look. He also wears brown boots and gloves with finger holes. The battlesuit, however, consists of a silver vest with shoulder plates, with metal plates in his boots, along with gauntlets on his arms for protection. Underneath, he puts on a navy blue bodysuit with a high collar. Quite the fashionista, isn't he? His helmet is made of a transparent material that appears to be glass, but is not easy to break. It is lighter in weight and thus more comfortable and durable on the battlefield.
Sure, glad to.
A different version of Avalanche can be seen in X-Men Evolution. X-Men Evolution features Lance Oliver's version of Avalanche, which is more of a teen thug and carefree variant. Voiced by Christopher Gray, Lance is often seen as a leader of the Brotherhood of Bayville whenever Magneto or Mystique was not around. And yes, he has done it while being a high schooler. The character's personality initially started off being uncooperative and hostile, while being aggressive in general. But as the series goes forward, this version has a character development where he grows to be more mature and seriously. The nature modifies and turns to be more sympathetic and comparatively softer. Though he had a foe with Scott Summers and Kitty Pryde, he develops feelings for Kitty. The two became romantically involved for a while, and this results in Avalanche retiring from the Brotherhood for the well-being of their relationship. Despite their breakup in the third season, they were able to reconstruct their relationship in the finale. On a side note, the Brotherhood members did end up joining S.H.I.E.L.D. at the end of the series, but the gems are hidden in the details, so why not dwell into it? You already know Lance was a high school student, so when he developed the mutant powers, it did not take him long enough to be unusual. He had the ability to create avalanches, and it is one of the first things he introduced to Kitty Pryde when he met her. However, Kitty escaped in that instance. Later on, he told two of his friends that he couldn't utilize his powers to steal the test answers for an upcoming exam, which he was going to use Kitty to take help from. He also uses his powers to punish Kitty's bullies, but this drove her further away as she only became more scared of him. Kitty was soon introduced to Jean Grey, who tried to help her understand certain powers and showed her telepathy and telekinesis. However, after Kitty left, Lance threatened Jean to back off as he emphasized on the fact that he would be the only one that Kitty would require any help from. He tried to clear the air out between him and his potential love interest, telling her that they had gotten off on the wrong foot, and explained to her that he too felt how isolated they were and how no one understands their powers, not even themselves. They met after school, and he showed her how his powers work while voicing out his views on their categorization as mutants and that there might be something that is actually wrong with them. Kitty became emotional, and they bonded enough for him to convince her to phase them into the office. He was encouraging her to learn how to properly control her powers under his guidance, while scouring through the computer to find the files he required. Kitty caught him transferring files, which made him lie that the tests were used to keep them down, but she remained doubtful. While her parents and Jean came to the office, he buried her father under a pile of books and attempted to kidnap her, but she phased her hand through. She was seemingly confined in the incoming avalanche that Lance commenced before fleeing. Luckily, Kitty could escape along with her parents and Jean before joining X-Men. A short while later, Mystique approached Lance and he took upon her offer to become a member of the Brotherhood of Mutants. She also enrolled him in Bayville High School and gave him the alias Avalanche.
Perhaps another time.
What makes Avalanche so powerful and effective? In order to understand why he is powerful, we need to understand where his power originates from. Seismic waves are a form of acoustic waves that are caused by a sudden change in the earth due to volcanoes, earthquakes, movement in a fault, or man-made causes such as explosions. Avalanche can create low-frequency vibrations in such intensity that his attacks range from mild vibrations in the ground to a large-scale earthquake in an area as huge as Paris. Seismokinesis is the word that is coined for his ability to pass vibrations through things. The pulsations can be so intense that they can turn stone into dust, and he has such control over his powers that he can fine-tune them according to his needs. Lance has been seen moving a tanker truck without damaging it, and moving objects across and attacking people with it. The only weakness, which is a big one actually, is that his powers have a negligible effect on organic or living objects. The one time he fought Hulk made him understand his limitations, because while he broke all the bones in his arms, Hulk remained unaffected. He doesn't need contact to affect something with his powers, he can just direct the vibrations towards it and control the intensity to make it work. One thing that all superheroes and villains are somehow trained in is hand-to-hand combat. Avalanche was the same too, since his close combat skills with bare hands are quite adaptable and strong, but his origin of this skill is a little different from the rest. His skills come from the fact that he was a Greco-Roman wrestler before joining the supervillain business. Freedom Force made him undergo hellish training in order for him to be so versatile with his hands and feet during difficult situations. While he doesn't have the ultimate healing and regenerative capabilities that mutants such as Wolverine have, Avalanche has more healing properties than an average human. This might be one of the things that is keeping him alive because he cannot avoid organic matter completely whenever he aims at his target. When the vibrations cannot pass through the target, he receives feedback, which can get a little too intense at times, such as in the case of his fight with Hulk. If he couldn't heal himself after that fight and regain his fitness back to normal, it is hard to say if he would have been of importance. Avalanche is a wave walker. Do you know what that is? If you are not familiar with the concept, wave walking is when the user uses waves as a mode of transportation. Since his medium is literally any inorganic material, Avalanche can create waves out of it by sending seismic vibrations through it. Pretty fancy, right? He calls it ground tidal waves when he travels by breaking the ground and converting it into a form of a conveyor belt. Although it does not seem to be the most convenient mode to reach somewhere on time, his power is kind of broken in the sense that it can be considered overpowered if done right. Since his medium can be anything that is inorganic, he can pass seismic waves through the earth, ground, water, and even air. Even though he can make vibrations strong enough to create a tsunami if he pleased, his powers work way better on solid medium such as ground, as mentioned above. Avalanche has situations where he cannot contact organic matter and receives harmful feedback. In order to supplement his resistance against things like these, his equipment consists of a body armor that provides him with full body protection. The armor is said to be so strong that it can protect him from a landmine explosion. He also has a two-way radio to communicate with his teammates. In Freedom Force, it was situated in his helmet while it was on his wrists when he was a part of the X-Corp. Avalanche has something along the lines of selective invulnerability when it comes to his powers. He can bring forth utter chaos by creating tsunamis, earthquakes, and landslides around him and still remain unharmed. But this has a little catch to it. If his powers are redirected towards him using some source, he can be injured heavily. So as long as he's out of reach, he can raise as much hell as he wants. Last but not the least, he is capable of direct vibration. For him to move or destroy something, he does not need to touch that object. He can directly move it via his seismic vibrations. His powers allow him that because his mobility would be severely limited if that were not the case. And with that, we come to the very end of this video. If you like this episode, do let us know in the comments and make sure to smash the like button, and we will see you in the next one. Until then, toodaloo. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.